I fell with an arrow in my back, and that night she offered her body to keep me warm. The sun was beginning its slow descent behind the tall, dense trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Birds chirped softly in the distance, and the wind whispered through the leaves, creating a calm, almost peaceful melody. Yet, for the young man walking along the narrow path, the serenity of the forest was nothing but a distant comfort. Every step he took felt heavier than the last. The day had been long and his legs ached, but he had promised himself he would reach the small clearing at the heart of the woods before nightfall. It was a quiet place he had discovered years ago, a place where the sunlight broke through the trees in golden streams, where the air smelled of earth and pine, and where the world seemed to slow down just enough for him to breathe. He was alone. He liked it that way. There was something freeing about being deep in the forest, away from the constant noise of the town, away from the expectations of people he barely knew. Here the only things that mattered were the rhythm of his own breathing and the crunch of leaves beneath his boots. But today, something felt different. There was a stillness to the forest that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The birds had gone quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. And though he told himself it was nothing, a small sense of unease began to creep into his chest. He stepped carefully over a tangle of roots, eyes scanning the ground for the uneven patches that could trip him. He didn't notice the sharp tip of the arrow hidden among the fallen leaves, sticking up just enough to catch the light. One careless step, one wrong movement, and suddenly pain shot through his back like a lightning strike. He gasped and stumbled forward, falling onto the damp forest floor. The arrow had found its mark. Breath. Shock and disbelief mingled with pain, leaving him frozen for a moment. How could this happen? Arrows weren't something you expected to find in a quiet forest on a regular afternoon. The young man tried to pull the arrow out, but it wouldn't budge. The pain was intense, radiating through his back, down into his legs, and up into his shoulders. He gritted his teeth and pressed his hands to the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. But it was no use. The warmth spreading across his shirt told him the situation was serious. Panic clawed at him. He had never been injured like this before, and the reality of being alone in the middle of the forest at night was terrifying. Breath became a struggle, and a cold sweat covered his face. He had to move, had to find help. But even the thought of standing up made the pain flare again. He dragged himself onto his hands and knees, every movement agonizing. The forest around him was darkening quickly. Shadows stretched like long fingers across the ground, and the trees seemed to close in around him. He called out for help, but his voice was weak, barely louder than a whisper. There was no answer, only the echo of his own fear bouncing back at him. His mind raced. How long had he been walking? How far was it to the clearing he had been aiming for? But most importantly, would anyone ever find him here? His heart pounded in his chest, and he realized with a sinking feeling that he could not make it on his own. The forest was beautiful, but now it felt endless, cold, and unwelcoming. Time passed slowly. Each minute felt like an hour. He lay on the forest floor, his strength fading, the arrow pressing deeper into his back with every shallow breath. He tried to focus on anything other than the pain, but it was relentless. He remembered stories he had heard of people lost in the woods, people who wandered too far and never returned. He never thought he would be one of them. He had always considered himself careful, mindful of his surroundings. But today, luck had turned against him. He closed his eyes, willing himself to stay calm, to conserve whatever energy he had left. Yet the fear lingered, gnawing at the edges of his thoughts, making it impossible to forget the gravity of his situation. Hours seemed to pass, though he couldn't tell for certain. The sun dipped lower, leaving streaks of orange and pink across the sky. Darkness crept through the forest like a living thing, swallowing the paths and making familiar trees look strange and unfamiliar. He shivered, not just from the cold, but from the creeping realization that he might be alone here all night. His lips were dry, his throat sore from calling out for help, and every muscle ached. He felt as though the forest itself was testing him, daring him to give up. But giving up was not an option. Somewhere deep inside, a spark of determination refused to die. He needed help for Head. He needed to survive. And then, as he lay there, his vision blurred from pain and fatigue, he heard a sound, a faint rustle of leaves, soft but deliberate. His heart leapt. Was it an animal? Or could it be someone?
He called out again, his voice trembling, weak but desperate.
The rustling came closer, and for the first time since the accident, he felt a glimmer of hope. A figure emerged between the trees, moving quickly but cautiously. She was small but strong, her eyes wide with concern as she knelt beside him. Without hesitation, she examined the arrow, her hand steady and sure, as if she had faced emergencies before. "You're hurt badly," she said calmly, though he could see the tension in her jaw. "We need to get you somewhere safe." She didn't ask for anything in return. There was no hesitation, no judgment. She helped him sit up, supporting his weight with a strength he could barely comprehend. Each step was excruciating, but she guided him carefully, murmuring words of encouragement that kept him conscious. The forest, once overwhelming and threatening, now felt a little less hostile with her there. He clung to her presence as they moved through the growing darkness, every step a battle against pain and fear. By the time they reached a small clearing, the sky had turned deep blue, dotted with the first stars of the evening. He collapsed against a fallen log, exhausted beyond belief, the arrow still lodged in his back. She knelt beside him, speaking softly, her hands busy with what little supplies she carried. Water, clean cloth, anything that could help. "You're going to be okay," she said, though the seriousness in her eyes matched his own awareness of how critical the situation was. For the first time that day, he felt a fragile thread of hope. Maybe he would survive this night. Maybe, just maybe, someone would see him through it. As the darkness enveloped the forest completely, he realized how alone he had been, and yet how suddenly the presence of another person could change everything. The pain was still sharp, the blood still warm in his skin, but he was no longer facing the night alone. Someone had come when he thought no one would, and in that quiet, fragile moment between fear and relief, he knew that survival was no longer just about fighting the pain. It was about trust, about connection, about the simple human act of someone choosing to stay by your side when the world seems to have abandoned you. The night had fully taken over the forest. Shadows stretched across the ground like dark fingers, and the cold crept into every corner, chilling the young man to the bone. His body trembled, not only from the pain of the arrow in his back, but from the dropping temperature that seemed to seep through his soaked clothes. The breath he took felt shallow and difficult, each movement sending sharp bursts of pain through him. Yet he was no longer alone. The woman who had found him crouched nearby, her hands busy but calm, moving with a quiet confidence that made his chest feel slightly lighter despite the circumstances. She looked at him with eyes full of concern. "We need to get you out of the open," she said softly. Her voice was steady, but the urgency was clear. "The cold will make things worse, and we have to keep you awake." He nodded weakly, trying to sit upright, but the effort made his vision blur. The pain was almost unbearable, a constant reminder that he was at the mercy of circumstances he could not control. The woman didn't let him struggle alone. She supported his weight, wrapping her arms around him to help him move. Every step was agonizing, but she encouraged him quietly, telling him to focus on breathing slowly, to take each step one at a time. After what felt like hours but was only a short while, they reached a small clearing where an old wooden cabin stood hidden among the trees. It was simple and worn, but it offered shelter from the forest night. The woman guided him inside, her hands firm yet gentle, as she helped him lie down on a thin rug that covered the dusty wooden floor. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and earth, a comforting smell compared to the damp forest outside.
"You're safe here for now," she said, her voice soft but reassuring.
I can help you, but you have to stay still. She moved quickly, retrieving a small first aid kit from a wooden shelf. Her hands were calm and precise as she cleaned the wound, checking the arrow and trying to minimize the bleeding. The young man flinched, but she murmured encouraging words, helping him focus on something other than the pain.
"You're doing fine," she sang.
I know it hurts, but you're alive. That's what matters, perhaps. Her presence was steady, almost soothing. He had never met her before, yet he felt a strange sense of trust forming. Fragile, but real. It was strange how quickly one could rely on a stranger in moments of true need. In the forest, in the darkness, with no one else around, she had become his lifeline. As she worked, she asked him questions, keeping his mind active, distracting him from the pain.
"Can you tell me your name?" she asked.
He whispered it weakly, and she repeated it, as if saying it aloud would make it real, would remind both of them that he was still alive, still human. I'm Elena, she said, introducing herself with a small smile. I live nearby. I come through these woods often, but I've never seen anyone get hurt like this. Her eyes softened as she looked at him.
"It's going to be okay. We'll get through this night."
The young man tried to respond, but words were difficult. His throat was dry, and the pain made it hard to speak. She noticed and handed him a small cloth soaked in water to moisten his lips. Even small gestures like this made him feel cared for, less alone. Realized how much he had taken for granted the simple act of being helped, of someone showing concern without expecting anything in return. Hours passed slowly, the forest outside dark and quiet. The wind rustled the trees, and occasionally the sound of an owl or distant animal reminded him of the world beyond the cabin. But inside, there was a fragile cocoon of safety. Elena worked tirelessly, adjusting the cloths on his wound, helping him shift when he needed it, and making sure he stayed awake enough to avoid slipping into unconsciousness. Every now and then, she would offer him water or a small piece of bread she had in her pack. He ate weakly, grateful for the nourishment even though his body ached too much to feel hunger. The young man realized how vulnerable he was, how quickly circumstances could change a person's life. One moment he had been walking through the forest, enjoying the calm of nature. The next, he was lying on the floor of a cabin, fighting to survive, entirely dependent on a stranger. Fear, pain, and gratitude mingled together in a confusing, heavy mix. But yet, despite the intensity of his situation, he felt a deep sense of connection to her. Elena's calm presence, her quiet determination, and her gentle care made him realize that survival was not only about strength, but also about compassion. As the night deepened, the temperature dropped further. The young man's body shook uncontrollably. His teeth chattered, and he felt a numbness creeping into his limbs. Elena noticed immediately and acted without hesitation. She stripped off her jacket and placed it over him, then moved closer, close enough to share warmth without crossing any personal boundaries. She whispered soothing words, encouraging him to breathe slowly, to focus on the warmth, on the safety of the moment. You're strong, she said softly. Just hold on a little longer. The worst is behind you now. We just have to get through tonight. Presence. Her calm voice and her gentle touch worked together like a shield against the cold and the fear. For the first time since the accident, he felt a small flicker of hope. He thought about the arrow, about how close he had come to losing everything. And yet, he realized that fear and pain were only part of the story. The story that mattered now was about survival, about kindness, about someone choosing to stay and help when the world seemed harsh and indifferent. Elena's actions reminded him that even in moments of danger and despair, humanity could shine through in small but powerful ways. Hours dragged on. He dozed in short bursts, always waking with a start as pain shot through his back. Breath. Each time Elena was there, ready to support him, to soothe him, to make sure he didn't give in to despair. Her dedication was tireless, and he began to admire not just her strength, but her patience and empathy. She never complained, never expressed frustration, only focused on what needed to be done. By the middle of the night, the young man's shivering became more violent, and his body was starting to fail against the cold. Elena noticed the increasing danger. She knew that if he didn't receive warmth soon, the night could become life-threatening. Without hesitation, she made a decision that only someone who truly cared could make. She moved closer, wrapping herself gently around him to share body warmth, keeping him from succumbing to the cold. Her actions were simple, natural, and human. A choice to protect life without hesitation. The young man was embarrassed and hesitant at first, feeling awkward in the close proximity. But he quickly realized that her care was entirely selfless, entirely focused on keeping him alive. There was no judgment, no expectation, only the quiet, undeniable truth that she had chosen to help him in the most direct way possible. Hers. In that moment, he felt a deep gratitude, a humility that came from understanding just how fragile life could be and how powerful compassion could be. Time passed slowly. He drifted in and out of consciousness, but her warmth and steady presence kept him anchored. The fear that had dominated his mind earlier began to fade, replaced by a fragile sense of security. He thought about what had brought him here, about the twist of fate that could have ended so differently. And he realized that sometimes survival depended on the kindness of strangers, on the courage of someone willing to act when others might have turned away. By the time the first hints of dawn began to filter through the cabin windows, the young man was exhausted but alive. The arrow remained, but the worst of the bleeding had stopped. He could feel the warmth of the sun beginning to chase away the cold, and he could feel the strength of his own body returning slowly, thanks to the care and presence of the woman beside him. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and felt a profound sense of gratitude that words could not capture. She smiled faintly, seeing him awake and alert, though still weak. "You did well," she said softly. "You survived the night. Now we can focus on getting you proper help." And for the first time, the young man realized that although the accident had brought pain and fear, it had also revealed something extraordinary. The quiet, but selfless courage of a human being willing to put another's life before their own comfort. In that small, quiet cabin, as the forest slowly woke around them, he understood a truth he would never forget. Life could change in an instant, from calm to crisis, from solitude to reliance on others. And in those moments, humanity, simple, caring, courageous humanity, was what made survival possible. The first light of dawn barely touched the forest, yet already the small cabin seemed to hold a sense of warmth and safety that contrasted sharply with the cold night outside. The young man lay on the worn wooden floor, still weak from the wound in his back, but he could feel the tiniest spark of energy returning to his body. The woman who had saved him, Elena, sat nearby, quietly gathering a few small items from her pack. She moved with purpose, every motion measured and calm, as though the events of the night had not shaken her at all. "You've done well," she said gently, seeing him stirring. "Your body has been through a lot, but it's strong. We just need to take care of it carefully now. Her voice carried a quiet authority that made him feel safe, yet also inspired him to try to push past the pain and weakness that still gripped him.
He tried to sit up, but the pain flared sharply across his back, making him wince and fall back onto the rug.
Elena immediately came to his side, steadying him with her hands. "Take it slow," she said softly. "You can't rush this. You're stronger than you think, but your body needs time."
She adjusted the makeshift bandage around the arrow, checking that it had stopped bleeding and that it remained secure. She worked carefully, explaining each movement so he would understand what she was doing.
Breath. They sat together in a quiet rhythm, punctuated only by the sounds of the forest outside. Birds chirped tentatively, and the wind whispered through the trees. The young man felt his breathing slow, his heart rate calm a little from the comforting presence of Elena. He realized that in moments of true fear, when life hangs in balance, the smallest gestures of care can feel monumental. A kind word, a steady hand, even a shared blanket could mean the difference between despair and hope.
"You need to eat something," Elena said, retrieving a small piece of bread from her pack.
Just a little at first. He took it hesitantly, barely tasting it at first, but the simple act of eating gave him a strange sense of normalcy. It reminded him that life still had ordinary moments, even in the middle of extraordinary danger. As he chewed, he realized how much he had taken for granted the simple things: food, warmth, safety. And now, each small act was amplified, shining with importance in a way he had never felt before. Hours passed as they remained in the cabin. The young man gradually regained some strength, enough to sit up without Elena's support, though every movement reminded him of the injury. He could feel the ache of the arrow in his back, a constant reminder of how fragile his body could be. Yet he also felt a growing sense of gratitude, a deep understanding of what it meant to survive because someone chose to act, to stay, to care. He glanced at Elena, who was quietly tending to a small fire in the corner, and he felt a rush of admiration. Her calm courage and practical mind had saved his life, and he could not imagine how he would have managed the night alone. As the day began in earnest, the forest outside the cabin seemed to awaken with renewed energy. Sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor, and the chill of the night slowly lifted. He could hear birds singing more confidently, and the distant rustle of small animals foraging for breakfast reminded him that life continued, even after terrifying events. The contrast between the peaceful morning and the terrifying night he had survived was striking. It made him realize that danger and safety, fear and relief, often coexist, separated only by a thin line of circumstance.
Elena spoke quietly as she worked.
"We need to get you to a place where you can rest properly and have someone look at that wound," she said. "It's better to be safe than risk an infection." The young man nodded, understanding. He was still weak, but he knew she was right. Staying in the forest, no matter how safe the cabin felt, was not enough. Desk. He needed proper care, and he needed to keep moving carefully to avoid worsening the injury. Together they prepared to leave. Elena helped him to stand, supporting his weight as they stepped outside. The sun felt warm on their faces, but the forest still held a quiet tension, a reminder of the accident that had brought them together. Each step was careful, deliberate, and slow. He could feel the muscles in his legs trembling with effort, but he focused on each step, counting silently, drawing strength from the presence of Elena beside him. She kept him talking, asking him questions about himself, about where he had been going, about his life before the forest. The conversation was simple, but it worked like a balm, distracting him from the pain and reminding him that life continued beyond the forest. By midday, they had reached a slightly wider path leading toward a nearby village. The young man's pace was slow, but each step felt like a victory. Every time his strength faltered, Elena was there to steady him, her hands firm but gentle. They moved together in a quiet rhythm, two people navigating a difficult situation with patience, determination, and trust. Along the way, they encountered small obstacles, fallen branches, uneven ground, and the occasional muddy patch that threatened to make the journey even more difficult. Each time, Elena guided him carefully, pointing out safe spots to step, holding his arm when needed, and offering quiet words of encouragement. He felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief. The world was no longer the terrifying, empty forest of the previous night. It had become a place where care and human connection could transform danger into survival.
Eventually, they reached the edge of the village.
The sounds of daily life reached them, the distant chatter of people, the laughter of children, the clatter of tools and wagons. It was a comforting, ordinary noise that reminded him of a world that still existed beyond fear and pain. Elena guided him to a small house where a local healer lived, someone she trusted to provide proper attention to the wound. The healer greeted them with concern but also with calm efficiency, and soon the young man was receiving the care he desperately needed. As the healer worked, Elena sat nearby, quietly ensuring that he remained comfortable and stable. Her presence was reassuring, a constant reminder that he was not alone. He reflected on the night, on the accident, on the fear and pain he had endured, and on the incredible kindness of the woman who had found him. The experience had been terrifying, but it had also been a lesson in trust, courage, and human connection. It had reminded him that even in moments of crisis, people could act with selflessness and compassion, offering help when it was most needed. By late afternoon, the immediate danger had passed. The young man was tired, sore, and still weak, but he felt a deep sense of relief. He knew recovery would take time, but he had survived. More importantly, he had been reminded of the quiet strength that kindness could provide. He looked at Elena, gratitude and admiration swelling in his chest. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice still weak but sincere.
"You don't have to thank me," she said. "I did what anyone would hope someone would do for them."
You're alive, and that's what matters. Her humility and calm courage left him speechless, but he understood.
Revival was not about pride or recognition. It was about action, compassion, and the choice to care for another person when it mattered most.
As evening approached, the young man rested on a simple cot in the healer's home, feeling the warmth of blankets and the steady care of those around him. His body was still fragile, but he felt a quiet strength returning.
And in that moment he realized that the accident, terrifying as it had been, had also shown him the profound impact of human kindness. One person's courage and selflessness had changed the course of his life, turning a night of fear into a day of survival and hope. The young man closed his eyes, reflecting on the journey from the forest to the healer's home. He thought about the arrow, the cold, the pain, and the fear that had seemed insurmountable. But he also thought about Elena, her calm presence, her tireless care, and her quiet courage. It had been her strength, her determination, and her empathy that had carried him through the night and into safety. And he understood that true courage was not always dramatic or loud. Sometimes it was simply the quiet choice to help, to stay, and to protect another human being when it mattered most. The young man's recovery in the healer's home had progressed slowly but steadily. His body ached, and even the simplest movements were still painful. Yet he felt a quiet hope that he had not known in days. The arrow in his back had been treated as best as possible in the forest, but the healer had warned him that the wound was serious and that his body needed rest, warmth, and careful attention. Elena stayed close, helping him adjust, bringing him water, and offering gentle encouragement. Her presence had become a constant source of comfort, a quiet reminder that he was no longer alone. The days were long and quiet. The young man spent most of them lying on the cot, the blankets pulled tightly around him to keep the chill of the early spring air at bay. He could hear the occasional conversation between Elena and the healer, their voices calm and professional, and he felt grateful that she had not left him once he had been in a safer location. It struck him how rare it was to find someone so selfless, someone willing to put another's well-being above their own comfort or schedule. Each small gesture, an extra blanket, a cup of water, a reassuring smile, felt monumental in its importance. The nights, however, were the hardest. Though the healer's home was safer than the forest cabin, the chill still crept through the wooden walls. He shivered beneath the blankets, the cold seeping into his bones despite their warmth. The pain in his back was never far from his mind, and the quiet darkness made it easy for fear and doubt to creep in. He worried that he might not heal properly, that complications could arise, or that the memory of the accident would remain with him forever. He tried to push the thoughts away, focusing instead on breathing and conserving energy, but it was difficult. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the shadows in the room grew long, he shivered violently despite the blankets. Elena noticed immediately. She came to his side, her eyes filled with concern. "You're still too cold," she said softly. She thought for a moment, then gently placed her hands on his shoulders, helping him adjust under the blankets. "We need to make sure your body stays warm. You can't fight the cold on your own." The young man looked at her, feeling a mix of embarrassment and gratitude.
He hated to be so dependent, yet he knew he had no choice.
He nodded silently, trusting her judgment. She moved closer, not in a way that felt uncomfortable, but in a way that simply shared warmth and support. The weight of her presence seemed to anchor him, and he could feel the tremors of shivering beginning to ease. "You're safe here," she said quietly, almost as if speaking to herself as much as to him. "You'll make it through the night." Her voice was calm and steady, and he felt himself relax slightly under the reassurance. It was strange how simple human touch could have such a profound effect. The fear and pain that had dominated him for so long began to soften, replaced by a fragile sense of security. As the night deepened, the young man thought about the events that had brought him to this point, the accident, the terror of being alone in the forest, and the sudden appearance of a stranger who had chosen to help him. All of it felt surreal, round. He remembered the first night, lying on the forest floor, wondering if he would survive until morning. And now, just a few days later, he was here, in the healer's home, slowly regaining strength. The contrast was striking. He realized that life could change in an instant, and that even in the darkest moments there was the possibility of hope and connection. Elena stayed close through the night, quietly monitoring him, adjusting blankets, and offering gentle words of comfort. At one point, he found himself drifting into sleep, exhausted from the pain and the tension of the past days. But every time he started to slip too deeply, her presence anchored him, keeping him aware, keeping him alive. It was not just her actions that mattered, but the reassurance that he was not alone, that someone cared enough to stay and act when the world seemed indifferent. As the night wore on, the cold persisted. Despite the blankets and the fire in the corner, he felt the chill creeping back into his body. Elena noticed, and made a decision that was simple yet profound. She moved closer, gently wrapping her arms around him, allowing him to rest against her side. There was no shame, no embarrassment intended, only a desire to protect life, to provide warmth, to ensure he would survive the night. He felt a mixture of relief and gratitude, overwhelmed by the selfless care that was being offered. "You're doing fine," she whispered, her voice soft and steady. "Just rest. Let your body heal." "I'm right here." Her warmth seeped into him, not just physically, but emotionally. It was a reminder that even in moments of extreme vulnerability, human compassion could create safety. and hope. He realized how rare it was to find someone willing to act without expectation, without hesitation, simply because it was the right thing to do. The hours passed slowly, marked only by the quiet sounds of the forest outside and the rhythmic breathing of the two people inside the room. He drifted in and out of sleep, each moment of rest made more secure by her presence. The fear that had dominated him for so long began to fade, replaced by trust and gratitude. He understood in a deep and lasting way that survival was not just about physical strength but about the quiet courage and empathy of another person. By the early hours of the morning, the young man felt a change within himself. The pain was still present, and his back still ached sharply with every movement, but the shivering had stopped. He could feel warmth spreading through his body, not just from Elena's care but from the realization that he had survived the worst moments of the past days. He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze, and felt an overwhelming sense of respect and gratitude. "You've done so much for me," he whispered, his voice weak but sincere. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." Desperate, "You don't need to repay me," she said softly. "What matters is that you're alive. That's all that matters." Her humility and calm courage struck him deeply. He realized that acts of kindness, especially in moments of crisis, were not transactional. They were human, instinctive, and powerful. They could change the course of someone's life, create hope where there was fear, and remind people of the quiet strength inherent in caring for one another. As the sun began to rise, casting gentle light into the room, he felt a sense of peace that had been absent for days. The forest outside was waking up, filled with the sounds of life returning. Birds calling, leaves rustling in the breeze, and the distant murmur of a stream. He felt connected to that world again. But more importantly, he felt connected to Elena. The bond they had formed over the past days was not one of romance or obligation, but of trust, gratitude, and the recognition of human courage and compassion. He realized that the experience had changed him. The fear and pain of the accident, the terror of being alone, and the relief of being cared for had combined to teach him a lesson he would never forget. That in moments of crisis, true human connection could be life-saving. It was not always dramatic or loud, but quiet, patient, and selfless. It was a reminder that people had the capacity to act with courage and kindness, even when it was inconvenient or difficult. For the rest of the day, he remained in the healer's home, resting and slowly regaining strength. Elena stayed nearby, assisting him, ensuring that he remained comfortable and safe. Each small gesture, each word of encouragement reinforced the lesson he had learned, that survival was not only about enduring pain, but also about accepting help and trusting the care of others. By evening, he could sit more comfortably, leaning against the pillows, feeling the warmth of blankets and the comfort of Elena's presence. The fear that had consumed him in the forest had faded, replaced by a quiet, steady hope. He understood that he had been given a second chance, a chance to live and to move forward, all because of the selfless actions of someone who had chosen to stay, to care, and to protect him when it mattered most. In the quiet moments of the night, as he drifted off to sleep again, he reflected on everything that had happened. The accident, the fear, the pain, the cold, and above all, the incredible kindness of Elena. He knew that the memory of her courage and care would remain with him forever, a reminder of the quiet but profound impact one person could have on another's life. He had survived not just because of his own resilience, but because of the warmth, compassion, and courage of someone who had chosen to act when it mattered most. The days that followed were a slow, steady path toward recovery. The young man could finally feel strength returning to his body, though every step was still careful, measured, and deliberate. The wound in his back, while no longer life-threatening, remained tender, and he had to be mindful of his movements to avoid reopening it. Yet, for the first time since the accident, he felt a real sense of hope and possibility. He was alive, and for that alone he felt a deep, unshakable gratitude. best. Elena remained a constant presence in his recovery. She moved through the small healer's home with quiet efficiency, attending to his needs without fuss or complaint. Sometimes she would bring him water or a light meal. Other times she would simply sit beside him, offering company and reassurance. There was a comforting rhythm to her care, a steady anchor that reminded him that he was no longer alone, that someone truly cared for his well-being. As he regained his strength, he began to reflect more on what had happened in the forest. The memory of the arrow striking his back, the pain and the fear he had felt came back in vivid detail. But now, those memories were paired with another powerful recollection: Elena's calm courage, her quiet determination, and the way she had stayed by his side through the night. He realized that without her, the story might have ended very differently. The thought filled him with gratitude, but also with a sense of humility. Life was fragile, and human kindness had the power to save it. With each passing day, he became more capable of small movements. He could sit up longer, walk a few steps with support, and even manage to stretch without sending sharp pain through his back. Elena encouraged each small accomplishment, celebrating his progress with gentle words and smiles that reminded him of his own resilience.
"You're stronger than you think," she said one morning as he managed to stand without assistance.
Her words carried warmth, not just in the sound of them, but in the unwavering belief she had in his ability to recover. By the time a week had passed since the accident, the young man could walk slowly without leaning heavily on Elena for support. Each step was still cautious, but the sense of independence returning to him felt exhilarating. Grasp. He understood that recovery was not just about the physical healing of his body. It was also about rebuilding confidence, regaining trust in his own strength, and learning to navigate the world again after a terrifying experience. During this time, their conversations grew longer, more personal. He shared stories about his life before the forest, the places he had been, the small joys he had enjoyed, and the challenges he had faced. Elena, in turn, told him about her life near the village, about her routines and the quiet rhythms of her days. Through these exchanges, a bond deepened between them. It was not a bond of romance, but one of respect, understanding, and a profound appreciation for the courage and care that had carried him through the worst moments of his life. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through the small windows of the healer's home, the young man finally felt ready to speak about the night in the forest that had changed everything.
"I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly.
"If you hadn't found me, His voice faltered, unable to complete the sentence. He did not need to finish. The weight of his meaning was clear. Elena shook her head gently. "You don't need to thank me," she said.
"I did what anyone would hope someone would do for them. You're alive. That's all that matters."
But they carried a depth that struck him profoundly. In that moment, he realized that true courage and selflessness were not measured by grand gestures or recognition, but by quiet, steadfast action in moments of need. The young man continued to recover over the next few days, gaining strength and endurance. Each morning, he would take a few steps outside the healer's home, feeling the sunlight on his face and the warmth of the earth beneath his feet. The forest that had once seemed threatening now appeared almost serene from a distance. He understood that the forest itself had not changed, only his perspective. He had faced danger, survived it, and now saw life with a renewed sense of appreciation for both its beauty and its fragility. As his strength returned, Elena helped him prepare for the eventual return to his home, or to wherever his life would take him next. She reminded him to move carefully, to listen to his body, and to maintain the habits that had supported his recovery. Her guidance was patient and thorough, ensuring that he would not only survive but thrive after the experience. Finally, the day arrived when the young man felt strong enough to stand and walk without assistance for a significant distance. He took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air fill his lungs, and stepped outside, looking at the path that led back to the village. He could feel the sun on his face, the breeze on his skin, and the steady beat of his own heart. Life had returned in all its ordinary yet miraculous simplicity. He turned to Elena, gratitude shining in his eyes. "I can't imagine where I'd be without you," he said. "You didn't just save my life. You reminded me what it means to trust, to survive, and to care for someone else. I'll never forget it." "That's all I ever wanted," she said. "To help someone in need." "You've learned something important, too. About yourself and about the people around you. That's worth more than thanks."
Breath. They walked together for a while, enjoying the simple pleasure of movement and conversation. He shared his hopes for the future, while she listened and offered gentle encouragement.
The bond that had begun in the forest, forged in the crucible of fear and pain, had transformed into a quiet friendship rooted in respect, trust, and shared experience. As the sun began to set, casting warm, golden light across the landscape, the young man felt a profound sense of closure. The accident, the fear, and the cold night had all been terrifying, but they had also revealed something extraordinary. The strength of human compassion and the quiet courage that could make the difference between life and death. Boss. He realized that survival was not only about endurance and resilience, but also about accepting help, trusting others, and recognizing the power of care.
In the weeks that followed, the young man fully recovered.
His body regained strength, and the wound in his back healed completely. Yet the experience left a permanent mark on his mind and heart. He carried with him the memory of the night in the forest, of the fear and pain, and most importantly, of the selfless courage of the woman who had stayed by his side. Whenever he reflected on the experience, he felt a sense of humility and gratitude. He understood that life was fragile and unpredictable, but that moments of kindness and courage could transform even the darkest circumstances into opportunities for hope and renewal. Elena's actions had not only saved his life, they had reminded him of the fundamental goodness that could exist in the world, even when fear and danger seemed overwhelming. Before leaving the village, he and Elena shared a quiet moment together. "I don't think I can ever repay you," he said, voice filled with emotion. "You don't need to," she replied. "Just live your life. Be kind to others, and remember that compassion is one of the greatest gifts we can share." With that, they parted ways, carrying the memory of their shared experience into the future. The young man walked back into the world stronger, wiser, and deeply grateful, understanding that the accident, as terrifying as it had been, had also shown him the extraordinary power of human kindness. He had survived, not just because of his own resilience, but because someone had chosen to act selflessly, to stay, to protect, and to care when it mattered most. In the years that followed, he would often think back to that night, the cold forest, and the woman who had saved him. He would remember not just the fear and the pain, but the warmth, the courage, and the compassion that had carried him through. And he knew that, no matter where life took him, he would carry those lessons with him forever. That survival is possible, that trust is powerful, and that one person's kindness can change the course of another person's life.